the letter she never sent. The bedroom had that particular stillness of a room no one has slept in for a long time. Eleanor stood with a cardboard box in her arms and looked at the shelf above the spare bed. 2 folded cardigans, a paperback with a cracked spine, a spectacle case she did not recognise. Outside, rain moved steadily against the small window. It was the 2nd Tuesday of October, and Eleanor had been telling herself since August that she would finish clearing her mother's things before winter. She had managed everything else with reasonable efficiency. The solicitor, the furniture, the careful distribution of the good china. This last shelf had waited 14 months, pushed back under the eave while she found other things to do. She lifted the cardigans, found the spectacle case, found the paperback, and at the bottom of the box, wrapped in a length of floral fabric, she recognised as a cut from the old sitting room curtains, a shoebox. Inside it, 38 envelopes, written across more than 40 years, each one sealed, each one addressed in her mother's careful hand to Mr. Martin Bell, Little Mizzlewick Station. Little Mizzlewick. Not one had a stamp. Not one had ever been sent. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed. The rain continued against the window. Somewhere on the lane a car passed, its tyres loud on the wet road, and then the quiet came back and settled around her. She took the shoebox downstairs and put the kettle on. Earlier that morning, crossing the green with a box of her mother's paperbacks for the village hall donation table, she had passed Ben Carter walking the other way with his collar up against the drizzle. He had offered, helpfully, to photograph the spines and run them through an app that could identify valuable first editions. She had thanked him. He mentioned that the app was actually quite good. She thanked him again and continued walking. The kettle clicked. Eleanor stood at the kitchen table with the shoebox open in front of her and picked up the first envelope. The flap was sealed with the kind of care that suggested the person sealing it had meant it to stay that way. She opened it anyway, telling herself, not quite convincingly, that her mother must have known she would. The letters were not what she had expected. There was nothing confessional in them. No feeling straining against the page. They were precise and quietly observed, written in the same hand her mother used for shopping lists and Christmas cards, only slower, more considered. The earliest was dated February 1970. Her mother would have been 21. It mentioned the waiting room at the station, a hard frost that had crept in under the platform door, and something Martin had said once about the 8:42 to the junction always running 3 minutes fast on cold mornings. The latest, dated April 2011, mentioned the lavender coming up early in the garden and the quality of the afternoon light on the platform in spring. Eleanor read enough to understand the shape of what she was holding. Then she put on her coat and walked to the station. The ticket office smelled, as it always did, of old paper and the particular cold that collects near glass. Lucy Carter was behind the window, working through something in a ledger. Eleanor asked, as evenly as she could manage, whether Lucy had ever known a Martin Bell. Lucy looked up. Martin Bell. He still comes in on Thursdays, 10:30. Always asks if the 10:15 is behaving itself. Eleanor kept her expression where it was. She asked how old Martin was. Lucy thought for a moment. 78, perhaps 79. He had worked at the station for years before Lucy arrived. Started as a porter, she thought. Cinders, the station's marmalade cat, was asleep on the far end of the counter, occupying precisely as much space as he considered his due. He did not stir. Eleanor thanked Lucy and walked back along the lane. Among the letters she had read that morning, one from 1973 had stayed with her. Her mother had written that Martin once held a connection she thought she had missed, waving the guard down on the platform while she ran. She had written, "You said it was nothing. I have been thinking about it since Thursday, and I do not believe it was nothing." Eleanor folded that one back along its original creases and set it to one side. She did not look at the station clock as she passed beneath it. She spent 2 evenings returning to particular letters, not reading them in order. She was not sure she had the right to that, but going back to ones she had already opened. The 1970 letter, the one from 1973, a short letter from 1984 that described a winter so cold the points froze, and the whole line stood still for 4 days, and how she had watched the empty platform from across the lane and thought about the particular quality of a place that is usually full of motion, standing still. The question she could not resolve was simple enough. Did Martin Bell know the letters existed? And if he did not, was learning of them now, at 78, a kindness or an intrusion into something her mother had chosen to contain? She walked to Nora Field's cottage on the lane behind St. Jude's. Nora opened the door, took one look at Eleanor's face, and put the kettle on without being asked. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall. Rain had come back in and pressed softly against the window while they sat. Nora remembered Martin Bell from the years when the station was busier and the village smaller and people's business harder to keep private. She remembered Eleanor's mother stopping at the station on errands that did not obviously require a station. She had not asked questions at the time. Your mother was not an unhappy woman, Eleanor. I want you to be clear on that. Eleanor had been thinking of the letters as a kind of absence, a life running quietly alongside the one she thought she had known. Nora's observation did not dismiss that. It shifted the angle of it. Eleanor sat with her hands around her cup and did not speak. She asked whether Nora thought Martin would want to know. I think he already wonders, Nora said. Men like that always wonder. They just don't ask. She poured a second cup and mentioned, almost in passing, that she had once asked Martin Bell what the busiest day he ever worked at the station had been. He had considered the question for a full minute before answering. The Thursday in 1987, when all 4 of the Henderson children were catching different trains to different places, and none of the trains were on time. Eleanor asked how Nora came to know this detail. He had told her, Nora said. He remembered every train. Even then, outside in the churchyard, somewhere in the yew, the last wood pigeon of the evening made its brief sound and went quiet. Thursday morning, Eleanor waited until 10:30, took the last letter from the shoebox and walked to the station. Martin Bell was at the far end of the platform, talking to Lucy through the ticket window in the easy, unhurried way of someone who has been doing this every week for 20 years. He was smaller than Eleanor had imagined, though she could not have said what she had imagined. He wore a green wax jacket and held a folded piece of paper, a current timetable, Lucy would tell her later. He picked one up each Thursday out of old habit. She introduced herself. He knew her name before she had finished saying it. You have your mother's way of standing, he said. She told him plainly, because it was the only way she knew. She told him about the shoebox. She told him the letters were never sent. She held out the last one and said there were 37 more, and that what happened to them was entirely his decision. Martin took the letter. He smoothed one of the corners gently with his thumb. Eleanor noticed that his hands were not quite steady. He looked at his own name in her mother's handwriting for a moment, then placed it carefully inside his jacket. I see, he said, though something in his face seemed to settle around an old answer. He asked if she had time for a cup of tea. They sat in the small waiting room while Lucy made tea in the back office with the deliberate, tactful sounds of someone concentrating very hard on something else. Cinders appeared, as he always did, from no obvious direction, and arranged himself on the bench between them with the settled authority of a cat who considers himself central to most proceedings. Martin talked a little. He said he had kept every timetable from every year he worked at the station, that they were in a box under his stairs, and he had never quite been able to say why. He told Eleanor one story about her mother from 1970. She had already half read it in the first letter, but she did not say so. She let him tell it. It was a better version. He did not ask for the other letters that day. He might ask later. He might not. Both were all right. Walking home, Eleanor took the longer route, past the lane where Martin's cottage sat behind its low hedge. The curtains were open. Nothing moved inside. The lavender border along his path was cut back hard for winter, grey and woody, barely there. She thought of something her mother used to say about lavender. Cut it right back to the wood, and it comes back stronger in the spring. Standing at her own gate, Eleanor had always understood this as advice about the garden. Behind her, the lane settled back into rain and quiet. In the garden, the cut lavender moved once in the wind, dry and stubborn and waiting for spring. She lifted the latch and went inside.